Imagine it. The year is 1825. The first patent for storing food in a tin can has been given. The very first passenger locomotive on a public line takes off in England. The very last Bourbon king, King Charles, takes the throne. There's an uprising against Tsar Nicholas I. The Dutch king kicks all foreign students out of the Netherlands. And the Java War begins. Also, Bolivia gains independence from Peru. And Uruguay gets independence from Brazil. And Portugal recognizes Brazil's independence from them. Alaska's boundary has been decided between England and Russia. And stateside, perhaps the most unfortunate of all, to promote their welfare and happiness, Congress has been urged to make reservations, and tribal chiefs in Georgia sign away their land and agree to move as of September. And lastly, the first president, who is the son of a president, wins an election as a Republican, the only current party going on at the moment. Election discourse is nothing new, and this particular election ruffled quite a bit of feathers. There were three main candidates who were running for office. You have Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, a name that we've heard before and we will hear again, and John Quincy Adams. But the thing here was that neither man had the majority. Jackson had the most votes, but no one could claim outright majority. So when you have a problem like that this time, what do? You take it to the House. When John Quincy Adams prevailed, all of the Jackson supporters were in an uproar over it. They claimed that the election was fraudulent, and they decided to make the rest of the term miserable for everyone, and we'll talk more about that later. Even though Jackson supporters tried to oust the new president, he decided to move on undeterred. And it was in his very first address to the nation that he started discussing major infrastructure plans, which was awesome because we needed the help. Adams was also a huge proponent of the arts and sciences. He wanted to use federal funds to create a national university as well as an observatory. But of course, Jackson supporters said he didn't have the constitutional authority to do so, so they effectively blocked him. In 1826, a major undertaking had been completed, and that was the making of military manuals for the first time. In 1827, the British colonies were no longer allowed to visit our ports. That's a whole thing. But in 1828, there was a really awkward situation brewing. And remember how I said earlier that Jackson supporters were going out of their way, they knew they were going to go out of their way to make this presidential term painful? This is the best example of that. In 1828, there was a thing called the Tariff of Abominations. And it was a South Carolina governor who was a fan of Jackson. And what he was trying to do, and this is unfortunately something that continues through today, when you have someone in power and you don't want them to be in power, sometimes there's a lot of, well, let me just say, what happens is there are bills that are introduced and no one expects them to pass. It's just meant to make people look bad, or it's meant to show weakness. It's meant for something. It's not meant to pass, right? So this governor in South Carolina, he wanted to do that. So he created a bill, and it was called the Tariff of Abominations. You'll find out why. But it was only meant to basically make Jackson look good. And what it was essentially there were these absurdly high tariffs being placed on raw materials. The only people this is going to benefit is New England. And if you remember around this time, we're trying to expand west. So doing something that's only going to be beneficial to one part of the country is not going to go over super well. And it didn't. But shockingly, it was passed. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. But the reason it made Jackson look good is because he was all about free trade. And so this thing that everybody was mad about that passed under Adams, and you have Jackson over here saying this is awful. It was awful. It was a tariff of abominations. Ironically, though, the governor who proposed this tariff in the first place ended up passing another bill later that allowed states to say no to these crazy bills that he introduced. So eventually this petty back and forth difficult term got to Adams, and he lost the bid for re-election. Funny enough, he was the second president to lose the bid for re-election, the first being his father. And one last final major accomplishment of Adams whilst in the presidency is that he came up with a settlement with the Tsar of Russia, Nicholas I, who was having issues of his own, but to kind of wrap up the War of 1812. So, at this point, if you haven't had enough of Andrew Jackson, tune in for the next video when we will be discussing, you heard it, Andrew Jackson.